So thank you, Wim. I think me being also one of the recipients of the top 50 Women Awards, I'm privileged and glad to be here talking about, as a panel chair here. The format of the panel discussion is to, firstly, the panelists to talk about their experiences as to how they have fought the system and, wade through the challenging times. So I'll start off with Shehara. Shehara, can you just share your experiences as to how you have fought your battles?
How have I fought the system? Well, I think I'm known to be quite contrarian in everything I do, but I think one of the things I've done is I've actually stayed within the system quite a bit. I think if you want to fight it, you can't stay outside and criticize it. You have to make the sacrifice to get in, suffer significantly, but if you want to change something, you have to be within it. Otherwise, it's anarchy. So a lot of us don't care about what the political process is, but honestly, unless you really then want to sacrifice and get into politics at a really high level, you're not going to make that much of an impact. We can use our vote, or we can try and create awareness through other ways, but you can't. So what I have done, I think, was, well, first it was self and family and stuff like that. So I had a situation where I had a single parent after a point of time. So I went abroad at some point, and I made money, as it were, and I built a career, and I built a name for myself. But at the quickest possible time, I came back, and then I went into government for 2 years. I went into the Board of Investment. And that was an absolute nightmare. I think government changed 2 or 3 times. I was taken under all sorts of charges to the Attorney General. And why? For silly things like getting someone to work on a Saturday. Nothing, my chairman went under corruption. The country was reeling all over. But I honestly felt that I managed to convert some minds and some people during that watch. We ended up #1 in the world as the fastest growing agency. All of it fell flat, and it's very sad to look back and say that possibly in some ways it has been my period of least impact, because there was no continuity on some of the big ideas and things we did. I have on my CV that I managed to take it up, but other than that, it is fake news, because as you can see, the Board of Investment is still in shambles. But what I've also done is try to look at myself and say, where can I be of some use and where can I make difference? So because I have now some power in terms of knowledge and position and stuff, as soon as it was possible that I got into companies anyway, I used myself, particularly in the gender area, to try and push a lot of agendas towards women's rights, equity, women on boards, that sort of thing. I think people sort of hide behind corridors. So I'm going to do one of those things. I've come to a point where I feel, is it worth getting to another panel and, freezing people's brains, because after a point you're hearing the same people and the same thing. So I'm going to ask you all at least one agenda. I came in here and think, is there one thing I can fix even at this place? So I'm going to ask you, how many accountants here? Only 2? Only 2 account. How many heads of businesses? Okay. So recently, I think Sulo did an interview with me on her Plenty, but on that was a thread of someone who challenged something I had said about, I had given the chambers, I wrote to all the chambers and said, if you really want to give women economic power, the power should start with women on boards, because there is a sphere of influence, and from there you can move companies, you can move entire organizations and sectors, and that's where to start. But then he turned around and said, why are you asking the chambers to do this 10-point plan? Do you know that the CA, or the Chartered Accountants international body, doesn't have a single woman on the board, and they go out and tell everybody about what business excellence is. They run the Premier Awards, yeah? And they have 30% of their membership as women, but they don't have a single woman on their board. And they are telling everybody else what to do. So I would like all of you who are members of any accountancy body or a company, please, as you go out today, will you slam a mail and will you tell them that you're going to boycott their next awards unless they have women on their boards? They've just got a woman CEO, but it's time we really push these guys. I don't think quotas work. I really don't think quotas work. But please stop getting the dialogues or anyone who doesn't have a woman on a board, at least to be a sponsor of a women's event. They are the constant sponsors, as you see. talking fluff about gender rights, and they can't do the basic minimum. If they can't get to their act together on business excellence, then I don't think they should be the ones at the forefront of spinning the dialogue around it. So let's start at any level to fight the system that we can. And if I'm just to wrap up, because I know you don't have much time, I think the idea of individual accountability is so fundamental to what we can do. So if we think we have 5 people we can influence, and if we can live our life in some way to influence those people to do 5 good things, you're already into 5 into 5 into 25. So there is a huge multiplier effect. I won't talk about Positive Lanka, but I know at some point Gani is going to ask me some questions, so I'll leave it there where we're really pushing this agenda of positivity and incrementalism. But if each and every one of you think, I'm not going to come to yet another seminar, yet another session, and hear the same stuff about how good we are as women, or how much we can do, and our potentiality, and then go back and do the same old things the same old way, we are not achieving anything. So like Rohantha said, if you're bothering with that 5 minutes or 10 minutes of reading an article or doing something or attending seminars, presumably either to network or to grow your minds, then for God's sake, use what little you get out of these things to make a difference and do one thing differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Shara. I think look in the mirror. Change starts with you. If you don't do it, no other person will do it for you. Thank you, Shara. Dawn, it's your chance.
Okay, so in the interest of time and getting, sorry, I've got a piece of paper because I talk too much otherwise. So on fighting the system, how do we change the mindset? For me, is the private sector capable of stepping out into that stage, into that space, and become an agent of change? Because in the private sector, we have some great players. We have great leadership. But how do we interact with governance, with governments, with agencies, authorities? For me, the reason that I think I've seen both sides of the spectrum is because I've been in business for 44 years. And that particular question I posed to the principal collector of customs is because I won't say on a daily basis, but on a regular basis, we have constant interaction in the organization I work with customs, right? And I'm going to just share one little story, and then I'm going to ask you to look at the flip side. Basically, we export perishable products, and therefore, our interaction at the airport with customs and authorities such as that is vital, because in the interest of freshness, we are obliged to get our goods out fast and smart. In 1987, which would be long before a lot of you in this room would have any knowledge, we had a serious insurrection in the country, which brought the wheels of business and the whole lifestyle of the country to a standstill. And all of a sudden, you would be told every organization has closed. Now, on a few occasions, our company was on the way to the airport when we were told, airport has closed. Customs is not working. They have been threatened. And we have a flight taking off, which has nothing to do with Sri Lankan Airlines at the time. It might have been an outside aircraft. The aircraft is leaving. We've got precious cargo that we have to get onto that aircraft. to maintain our reputation, and to maintain the whole export system. I have on 2 or 3 occasions been able to pick up a phone. I didn't know him personally, but ring the Principal Collector of Customs and the Secretary to the Treasury and say, hey, you know what? I've got 1,000 kilos of perishable cargo. Customs is not working. What do you want me to do? They would say, give me 5 minutes, Mrs. Austin, I'll call you back. No mobile phones, landlines only. You didn't know that you'd sent a WhatsApp message and a second tick that they had even read your message, right? And I have had the Principal Collector of Customs and also the Secretary to the Treasury call me and say, Mrs. Austin, just go through. I've instructed them to load your cargo. You can file your papers in the morning. Nobody stopped me. Because people in authority took decisions with integrity. Their characters were totally, undeniably clean. And that was how the private sector interacted with the public sector, right? The public sector was merely a facilitator to get private sector rolling. Come to the year 2010, let's say 20th century and 21st century. I don't think even with the best reputation in the world, you will get somebody in a position of seniority willing to stick their neck out for you. And that is the example that filters down to the bottom. So, how do we become agents of change for the lethargy, which we think is lethargy, but in fact, are they frightened? Are they frightened of being brought before a commission from the top to the bottom? But I think the time has come, and I think in the last 2 to 3 years, at long last, the private sector is standing up and saying, hey, you know what? You need us more than we need you. And if this country is to develop economically, we have to join hands with all agencies across the private sector to stand up and say, you know what? You guys, you work for us. I'm paying your salary. This is my job. We need action from you, and we need all of you to demonstrate a level of integrity and ethical practices. So, without laboring the point, I'd like to throw this open to the House. I report, you decide. Do you want to be an agent of change? Do you want to engage with the government? Do you want to say to them, look, you be the facilitator, we'll be the engine of growth? That is where I'd like to go. And that is where I said, are we going to be athletes in the private sector, in the business community? Are we going to be people who are going to put our hands up and say, you know what? I stand for integrity. I stand for what is right. I stand for the economy of this country. This is my vote. This is where I want you to go. You know, we spend in the private sector, we spend time, energy training people to bring them into what I would call the culture of a company. Is the government doing that? Are we asking them? Rohanta, I can say to you, you know, have you ever been invited to train government officials? Do they have professional bodies that train their people? Right. So if your private sector is successful, why is your government sector not successful? I'd like to leave that with you all. For me, it's more a question of, you know, an athlete, I think that they train for a purpose. Government must train for a purpose. With that, I'll leave it.
Thank you, Don. I think whether it's government or private sector, we are all in it together. This is our country. So we must stand up for what we believe in, and that's what her message. So I think we will have more deliberations after we finish with Rohan. Rohan, it's over to you.
Thank you, Kani. Well, today in the morning, I think, talked about Dilrukshi. I call her Dilrukshi Aksi because she and my sister, who was going to be here, Shiromi, they were in the same class and we know each other very well. I must tell you, we're talking about integrity. I think that we missed a word. With integrity, there has to be something called discipline that comes into anybody. You can have best integrity, but if you're not disciplined enough, you cannot be a change agent, you cannot fight the system. I fight the system every day. Now you might think I'm fighting the government. No, I fight the private sector. I really think, Don, we have problems in our private sector too. Attitudes needs to be changed in this country. Private sector put deals with governments. Private sector put deals with politicians. They talk one thing at a panel discussion and outside the door, I just told that, but you know, that's how things happen in this country. I know it for a fact. There's conspiracy theory every day. I started my career as a management trainee at Haley's. So these days Haley's are on news. All of you know that. My boss was late Rajan Yatavara. He always taught me, do what is right by the country, not but what is right by Haley's. And I fought things against Haley's as the then Shippers Council chairman. When they did wrong, I said they're wrong. Even today when they are wrong, I say they're wrong. But if they are not wrong, I go to the media and say they're right. On this garbage thing, they have been unfairly treated. The guy knows, my name is on the net, the Daily Telegraph UK, saying I am the one who brought the garbage to Sri Lanka. Yes, this is media. And then this lady calls from London, Emma, apologizes, corrections put. But the damage has been done because it's gone all over. In the United States, Australia, I'm getting. So I really don't care because I will put it right. I know in my heart of heart. But I have to fight the system. I know about customs. People say customs are corrupt. Yes, provided you don't know the job. Provided you can't challenge them. Provided you are doing something illegal and you want their help. You can't blame the person who takes bribes. Other side is also wrong. I have been a shipping manager for 5 years in my career. I never gave a cent to customs. So I won't blame customs. Private sector is to be blamed. They want to get things done quickly for their own things. They want to under-invoice. So there's a balance down here. I know the industry for 30 years. So I fight every day. Yesterday I was with the US ambassador. She was telling me, Rohan, this country, I have been into many countries, but this country, every week there is a conspiracy theory. Every week. And that conspiracy theory lasts for weeks and weeks. Do you think investors will come? We are in a bad situation. We can just blame the government, green, yellow, blue, white. We're not as citizens fighting the problem. We're not taking anybody on. We go in like a ralla. In Sinhalese you call. Everybody will do that. So I am not a popular person in my industry. She knows that. I am a well-known person. But I am not popular because I am not nice. I don't even look up to any top managing director of a blue chip and say, I will draw you a line. I won't do that. I worked with Mr. Ronnie DeMille for 12 years. I never called him sir. I call him always Mr. Minister. He taught me that. Right? So fighting the system is not only fighting the government. First fight yourself to see whether you are doing the right thing. Then see whether your corporate sector company is doing the right thing. I had that luxury to walk into Mr. Yatavara's room and say, no, you are wrong. Boss, you are wrong. He used to accept that. So this is what I'm trying to say, be straight, be disciplined, and be integrity is absolutely important. So this is the way I fight the system, and I still go on fighting the system. If I can change Sri Lanka for a little bit of a better place, I will do that. But I want to be popular among many people, I know that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rohan. Quite an outspoken person in the industry, right? Very rightly he said that. Rohanda, now I think Rohan also mentioned that, I mean, we keep blaming the others, because when you point a finger at somebody, you must understand that 3 fingers are pointing towards you. So we also have to first be responsible for actions, right? So for us to fight the system, first you need to conquer the mind. Can you just elaborate on that?
Conquer the mind.
Conquer your mind.
Yeah. See, I think the first thing that you have to understand is that let's not talk about the government if you are not prepared to work with the government. I worked 17 years, multinationals, UN, and then I said, for 3 years, I'm going to work for the government. And that is the first conquering that I did. I took over position as chairman of Sri Lanka Export Development Board, took over as chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, and then I was chairman of Lanka Satusa. I did my quota of 5 years in the government, and I've gone back. So the first thing that you have to keep in mind is you must be prepared to give at least a year or 2 to work for the government, or otherwise learn to work with the government. The second point is, just like what Rohan was saying, the corruption is not the government. Corruption is the private sector. It's the private sector who has done the worst corruption in the last 10 years. It's a private sector who gets the government to do corruption. I can very categorically mention that having led the 3 of the largest institutions in this country, including Lanka Satusa, which is 32 billion rupees, 95 to 96% of the public sector are 100% honest. Their work ethic is brilliant. All that they're asking is, can I have good leadership? If they have a good leader, they work with you. I mean, we turned around Lanka Satusa from a 2 billion loss-making entity to 160 million profit in 1.5 years. The most corrupt organization. How? Because the people realized that we will not take 1 cent. And they started reciprocating. So it's all about how you lead that gets you in. When I was chairman of the Export Development Board, I remember one day minister sent, 8 o'clock in the night, I got a note saying, transfer 1 million rupees to Singapore. Everybody knows. First thing I did was I called the Treasury Secretary, because I don't know anybody. That was my first job in the government. I called and said, sir, there's something like this, what do I do? He said, Vanta, cope ekata yanna puluwan. That time it was cope. I said, sir, cope enna isala mage taattana ma wedi tiyala dai. I just gave my resignation, moved out. But within 2 days, the president called and said, no, you're not going to go out. I know what happened. You're going to head the National Council for Economic Development. So I think conquering of the mind, the answer to your question, Gani, is number 1, a time has come when you cannot say, I'm not going to work with the government. It's all about saying, I'm going to work with the government or for the government, and I'm going to make the change. And the change is possible, I'm telling you. The second point is that within the next 6 to 9 months, Sri Lanka is going to come back very strong. We have seen this. I mean, when I was sitting in the National Council for Economic Development in 2008-9, we were crashing. I mean, there were days where we had in the treasury only 11 days of money in 2009. But from 2009, the economy from a 30 billion economy today is 90 billion. Tourism is going to bounce back in the next 6 to 9 months, for sure. If you look at what happened in Bali, what happened in Europe, in UK, what happened in France, what happened in in Rwanda, within 6 to 9 months, tourism will recover. It could be organic recover because we don't have a global marketing campaign, but yet we will recover. And the country is definitely going to cross $100 billion in the next 1 year. Our brand value is about 87 billion, will be 100 billion. So the country is poised for growth. Small country, it will turn around. I'm telling you this because I was heading the Economic Council for 4 years. So it's possible, but it's only that you have to have a mindset to say, I'm going to work with the government, I'm going to either work for the government, and I'm going to lead.
Thank you, Rohanta. I think it brings me to another question now. Amidst the doom and gloom that we see and hear, and most of us, majority of the population here are armchair critics and talking about what they should do as if they are capable of running this country. But I will now turn to Shehara, because she is somebody who initiated a campaign when most of us were criticizing about the government and whatnot. And she actually spearheaded this Positive Sri Lanka campaign to kickstart the economy. Would you like to share some thoughts on that?
Thank you, Gani. So I didn't spearhead it. Actually, Asanka from Loisa Rongs is the one who walked into my room one day with this idea. Well, Asanka had worked in the Silicon Valley. He was there during 9/11, and he understood the kind of interventions that the US government did at the time of the World Trade Center bomb in the US. And he had got a personal hit because he was supposed to open up a shop in Shangri-La, and suddenly he found that all the cash flows were gone because he couldn't open up the shop. He had invested in stock, and he looked around, and instead of moaning and groaning about himself, he looked around and said what had happened to Sri Lanka was actually because of Aurudu sales, April, right? So you had the Aurudu sales and you had the peak season coming in. There was a lot of inventory stuck. Then there was a sudden crash in terms of all of us were staying at home. We were shell-shocked, right? So we were all at our homes doing nothing, staying in, worried whether we could even just get to work or back or take our kids around. So suddenly you found that we were hurtling towards an economic recession. And so we looked around and he said, we need to get this going. So we ran some numbers, we talked to some economists, we went and met the governor, I facilitated meetings, that's all I did. But the core idea of it is very simple, right? In the US, they had cash for clunkers, they started throwing in money and somehow stimulating some kind of economic movement. But in all transformation strategies, and that's one learning that I think will be very useful for all of you, they say this, if you want to move fast and do something, whether it's to take a company and change it, if it's very complex, there will have to be layers of insight as to how to do it. We went with such a simple idea. We said, what if we could get 350,000 people, that's all, 350,000 people, right? Middle class or elites, and get them to put $5,000 each. We will get $10 million and $100,000, $10,000 each for possibly 1,000 victims and their families, substantive amounts. But on the back of that, could we create a huge spending free, a whole lot of activity where every individual tries to do something to stimulate the economy? Because if you can get $100 million into the system, and again, it was just 350,000 people spending $50,000, right? That's the maths. So you can make it very simple. And you get them to spend that in a tight period of time, like 30 days or 60 days, you will get $100 million. The amplifier, the economic modeling is that versus giving a charity, if you actually spend it within a system, so you spend it in this hotel, you will end up, the tips will go to the waiters, there will be various things, and they will go and buy something at a kade or at a supermarket, and those guys will get money, and there is a 5-time multiplier for Sri Lanka. Some countries it's 7, some countries it's 4.5, right? So we knew we would get 500 million. All we had to do was aggregate some of the issues that were there. For example, there is I won't take too long, a discounting system that's inevitable because demand is coming down, so prices are dropping, so you're finding everyone discounting. But for some reason, Sri Lanka has never had a sale period. Like you have everywhere, you have sale Singapore, sale Malaysia, you have it all over the world. So we wanted the Indians to come. All the research says Indians like retail, but we hadn't bothered to aggregate these things and say, sale, we can just get these things done. if we could, like Black Friday, get a VAT down and this thing, then you'll get another 15% and again a discounting, which means people will go and buy those TVs and this and that. So wherever you spend the money. So again, at a personal level, what I did was, because I'm actually hit 60 this year, so I thought, you know what, I wanted to go, I had a bucket list, I wanted to see gorillas in Uganda. And I suddenly thought, you know what, I've got to blow $1 million on this if I really want to do it. I think I've earned the money international, locally. I had the money to spend, but I thought I can't do this to my country. I'm going to spend this $1 million here. So I threw one hell of a party this time, and everyone said, that's not you, you're not ostentatious. I said, no, I'm going to just blow it up in my country extravagantly. And I've told all my friends who are very well off and spend much more, Dawn, you probably do 3, 4, 5 trips. Please cancel some of those trips, spend it in Sri Lanka, put it back into our economy, it'll multiply by 5, you'll get good karma and more. So that's what Positive Lanka is about. Food festivals, music festivals, sales, what have you. Just get out there, do what you can at every company level. Talk to your employees, and then at the back of it, we're going to, of course, spin out things about positivity and incrementalism and racial integration and harmony, and a lot of other things will happen with some of the money. So we've got all the media in, giving us about $500 million, and we've got about 75 to 100 companies now who are all pledging to come in, and it's just rolling out.
Yeah. So thank you, Shahara. I think it's quite an inspirational story. I mean, it's not that we cannot do. We have nice ideas, but just that the will to do that. So I'll quickly put to the audience few questions if you have, because it's a very interesting panel who has, yeah, there is somebody at the back.
I want to make a small correction. I'm a fellow member from Chartered Institute of Sri Lanka. There were 2 ladies in the board, and unfortunately, last 2 years there was no lady. And this year also there's a lady going to contest. The previously 2 ladies, one is Corley Peters, she's the group FD from Finlays, and the other lady is Lakmini Nanayakara. Unfortunately, from a tragedy, she got passed away. She was working in Ernst & Young. The other matter is, you said that private sector should get the responsibility entirely on bribes and all what you're talking about. But let's talk about this VAT. Now she was talking about VAT 15% and all. Now we keep all the documents ready in our office and the financing division, and we walk into the department and we are asking our refunds, right? And we have these ladies who are working in the accounts divisions also will witness on this. We go to the department and we will ask, can we get our refund within the reasonable period of time? And the ladies or the gents they are equipped with all the documents what they need to provide to. But unfortunately, there's a whole process. By the time we receive the money, the time value of money has gone, right? So therefore, I don't think that the private sector only should take the responsibility and all. So therefore, I urge from the panelists that who are there on the head table, cannot blame entirely to the private sector. Thank you.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's not only the private, but it's the government sector also. Agreed. Just to conquer what Shara was saying, you know, even in the tourism sector, it's an amazing situation where the private sector has got together and they are supporting the government. They went, got the travel advisory softened. The private sector took the leadership. Private sector got together, talked with the government and got the relief for the moratorium coming out. And now, private sector last week had a huge roadshow in London, totally driven by the private sector. So you sometimes, the point I'm just trying to say is the private sector needs to take leadership sometimes when the government is faltering. We know that there are a lot of issues in the government as we speak right now. So, you know, that blend sometimes have to happen. And it comes with, I would say, corporate athleticism.
Can I just respond to the Chartered Institute?
Very short, yeah.
Very quickly. It's not good enough. You have to have, if you have 30% of your membership, when some women move on, you have to get other women in there. That should have been held for women. So I don't stand for that.
Yeah. I think she has written a very interesting article 2 years back in Daily FT. I suggest all of you should read that, especially the men, right? 10-point scorecard for, you know, boys really walk the talk, right? Okay, I think we've just come to an end, just on the dot. Thank you, everyone. I think you've been a great panel, and I'm sure, sorry that we couldn't have enough questions, we couldn't take enough questions from the audience. I'm sure the experiences that they shared would be useful for you, because if you want to be fit to compete, you need to be strong, especially like what he said, we need to physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So we have to keep that in mind. First, it starts with you. Once you achieve that, and once you conquer your mind and physically you're fit, then obviously it will actually get propagated to your company, the society, and the country as a whole. Thank you very much.